and thank you for joining us. I'm Wilson Stribling. Welcome to a special edition of At Issue, where we discuss and debate the issues facing the state of Mississippi and how these issues impact you. At issue tonight, Mississippi's 2 U.S. Senate seats. We're just days away from the November 6th elections, when Mississippians will go to the polls to choose both of their U.S. senators. The state's senior senator, Republican Roger Wicker, is running for re-election, seeking his third term in the Senate. His opponent is Democratic State Representative David Baria of Bay St. Louis. There is also a special election on November 6th to decide who will serve the remainder of Senator Thad Cochran's term. Running in that race are the appointed Republican Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith of Brookhaven, Democrat and former Congressman Mike Espy of Jackson, Republican State Senator Chris McDaniel of Ellisville, and Democrat Tobey Bartee of Goshen. MPB's political analysts, Republican Austin Barber and Democrat Brandon Jones, will join us in a moment to share their insight on the election. But first, At Issue producer Ashley Norwood spoke with candidates on the campaign trail about their position on the issues. In the general election, Democrat David Baria says he is focusing on 3 main issues: infrastructure, public education, and health care.
Mississippi has 3 huge issues that we're having to deal with on a daily basis, and they are health care, public education, and infrastructure. And when I talk about infrastructure, I'm not talking about just roads and bridges, because I'm talking about our electrical grid, I'm talking about water and sewer and gas distribution lines, and I'm talking about internet. Because even if we were to fully fund MAEP, our public education, K through 12 public education funding formula, if we were to do that tomorrow, schools in the Delta still wouldn't be able to keep up with schools in Jackson, Mississippi, or Madison, or Gulfport, because they don't have access to high-speed internet. So it's not fair to them. So we have structural infrastructure issues all over this state, but they're more acute in underserved communities than they are in communities that are tax wealthy. And the same is true with funding our public education system. If you cut funding, it's going to hurt everybody, but it hurts underserved communities more acutely, because Madison is tax rich, Gulfport, Jackson County, tax rich areas don't hurt as badly when the legislature cuts funding. And then finally, health care. We refuse to take $12 to $15 billion of our tax money back to the state of Mississippi and help our rural hospitals, and provide 300,000 of our brothers and sisters with some payment mechanism so that they don't have to decide, are they going to pay the car note or are they going to take little Johnny to the doctor? That's shameful, in my opinion. But in addition to that, our rural hospitals are filing bankruptcy because we didn't do that and help them through this difficult time. And then finally, we would have created 8,000 to 9,000 high-paying medical sector jobs if we had done that. It was a purely political decision. Let's make no bones about it. The governor didn't do the right thing because it was pure politics, and the Republicans didn't do the right thing for pure politics. And my opponent is one of those people who opposes the Affordable Care Act and who apparently wants to end coverage for pre-existing conditions. Can you imagine if you didn't have coverage for pre-existing conditions? I mean, that puts the welfare of your family at risk, and it's just wrong.
MPB News made several attempts to talk with Republican Roger Wicker, but he was unavailable for an interview. On Tuesday, Mississippians will also take the next step in deciding who will permanently replace retired Senator Thad Cochran. The 80-year-old Republican served in the Senate from 1978 until this past April. His term does not end until 2021, and the special nonpartisan race to fill that void is one of the most talked about contests on the ballot. At Issue producer Ashley Norwood follows 4 of the candidates on the campaign trail.
Former State Agriculture Commissioner Cindy Hyde-Smith was appointed by Governor Phil Bryant to Cochran's U.S. Senate seat in April. Cochran was into his 7th term when he resigned due to illness. As Hyde-Smith seeks a full term in the Senate, she talks about her top concerns.
I tell everybody I'm here for 2 reasons, and that's jobs in the economy and less regulations. You know, we just need an atmosphere in Mississippi that fosters economic development and the opportunity for a job and people to follow their dreams and not have to leave the state. And that is my number one focus. That's my number one desire, my number one goal, is everybody deserves the dignity of a good job. And you know, when you have the tax cuts and when you have the expansion and the economy growing like it is and the unemployment rate so low right now, we are prospering. And so that is a very good position to be in. I am the only candidate that's been endorsed by the National Rifle Association. And the Second Amendment rights is very important to me. They always have been. And it's not just about, so I can go hunting. It's so I can protect myself. And it's about so I can protect my family. But legal, law-abiding citizens that go purchase a weapon should have the right to do that without us using any federal dollars to keep track of who's buying what. And that's the reason that I introduced the GRIP law, is what we're calling it. And that is that there's no federal money can be used to register any legal law-abiding citizen to purchase firearms. The right to life, I think you mentioned that on my website. I think every life is precious and every life needs to be protected. And I've been endorsed by the right to life because, it's just, that's not a position you take to gain votes. That's a position that it's who I am. It's the fabric of my makeup. Because the sanctity of life is just, there's nothing more important to me than that.
Former Mississippi Congressman and former U.S. Agriculture Secretary Mike Espy is Hyde-Smith's closest opponent. He says he's the best candidate with the most experience.
So the difference is simply experience. I served as a member of Congress. I served as Secretary of Agriculture. So what is that? Agriculture in Mississippi is #1 industry, #1. It still is. And I was the nation's highest authority in agriculture for 2 years. So the farmers remember me. They remember that I negotiated the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, which brought increase in their revenue and their bottom line. They remember that. And they know that I know the federal issues, not the state issues, excuse me, but the federal issues. So if you ask me why me over her, I'll just simply say to you that I'm a better candidate because I've got more experience. And I believe in the things that affect them the most. And here's the one that I think is the #1 issue in this campaign. Mississippi is a state where rural hospitals are closing. And I just read a newspaper article this morning about one maybe closing in Mississippi Delta. So why is that? It's because this state did not accept the Medicaid expansion money when it was offered. I think that's wrong. I think we should have accepted that federal money because we could keep these rural hospitals open. We could keep the access being offered to patients, and we could keep the economic development in these rural areas going. Simply because we didn't accept that, I think that's causing a lot of these rural hospitals to close. Here's the second one, and here's the difference. I believe in mandating that insurance companies cover these claims even though the illness or the condition may have been pre-existing. That's a big, big, big deal for Mississippi. And she voted against it. And it failed by 1 vote. So I'm saying that she voted against Citizens of Mississippi. So when you ask me why her, I'm saying she's voting against the interests of Mississippi. I'm the better candidate because I'm experienced and I've got the better values that Mississippians care about.
Republican State Senator Chris McDaniel has created what he calls a contract with Mississippi. He says government with less regulations would be beneficial for the state.
I think in this day and age of politics, we're all so busy shouting at each other, and we're also busy trying to label each other, that we forget the core component of what we're supposed to be doing is empowering individuals, not government and not collectives. In everything that we do, in every speech that I give, and every vote that I cast, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is to make sure that you have, and I have, and he has, the maximum of individual liberty consistent with social order. I don't believe government should micromanage our lives. I don't believe government should micromanage our economic lives, or our social lives, our healthcare lives. I believe ultimately that's up to people to decide. So the contract revolves around those core components of individual liberty. Everything from term limits to tax cuts to regulatory reform, it's all about empowering the individual. And I would encourage people to check it out. It's there on the website, and I'm very proud of it.
McDaniel has been critical of Hyde-Smith, calling her a lifelong Democrat. Hyde-Smith switched to the Republican Party in 2010 after serving as a Democratic state senator.
It goes back years. She was a former federal lobbyist, And when she was a lobbyist, she lobbied for a healthcare organization that was pushing universal health care and/or Obamacare. Number two, she was a elected office holder, 3 terms as a Democrat. Number 3, we know from her time in the Democrat Party through sources that knew her very well that she supported and voted for Hillary Clinton. We also know she's pushed for tax increases. She's tried to impose a gun ban on state agricultural properties. We know that her biggest donor, her largest donor, is a guy named Sean Parker, who gave $250,000 to Cindy Hyde-Smith's PAC. That PAC is designed specifically for her and to attack me. Sean Parker was Hillary Clinton's biggest donor as well. So you put all these puzzle pieces together, it's very clear that she hasn't been a Republican and she hasn't been a conservative. And that's okay. That doesn't mean she's a bad person. She ought to own it. There's nothing wrong with being a Democrat if you just own it.
Gaucher resident Tobey Bartee is the only candidate in the race without political experience. However, he says his years as a Navy serviceman prepared him to solve issues on the federal level.
Government is about 2 things. One, taking a look at a problem, truly understanding what that problem is, and then the second thing is allocating the scarce resources that we've combined as a society to address those problems. So one is about getting to the truth, and the other one is about just the business of government. How do you go about addressing those? And I didn't get into it within each of the descriptions from my background, but I've worked that across each of those areas in each of those organizations, looking at getting to the truth. Primary responsibility of intel regardless of what you do. And then I worked the resource management piece both at the State Department and also at the Department of Homeland Security. So the focus of our campaign is the vision, if you will, is a one Mississippi. And there's essentially 2 components to that. There's a focus on the people, and then there's a focus on a forward-looking perspective. For the people, we talk about Mississippi is at its best when it's able to leverage the strengths, talents, and participation of all Mississippians. And I call that the 3 Million Strong campaign. 3 million strong, 3 million deep. Roughly the population of our state. And if we're going to get to where we need to be able to tap into the potential of all of our citizens and make sure that they feel like they have a voice within this process, which is really important. And then the second part is that forward-looking perspective. We talk about the one focus, and it essentially says that the investments that we make today, and you truly do have to characterize them as investments, they create the opportunities of tomorrow. Our peer states approach those issues, the ones that are doing well, they approach those issues with that focus towards the long term. And our competitors across the globe, they're also, if they're positioning themselves for the future, they're doing that with the key investments in education, key investments in healthcare, and key investments in infrastructure. And we have to talk about that too as a state.
Joining us now are our 2 political analysts. Austin Barber is a Republican national strategist. He's the founding partner of the Clearwater Group. Brandon Jones is a Democrat and an attorney with the Baria Jones law firm. He's also a former member of the Mississippi House. Gentlemen, welcome to At Issue.
Thank you.
Special edition of At Issue. Austin, let me start with you. Why is this midterm election for both of these Senate seats so important?
Well, listen, we've got to remember sort of what's at stake and where the numbers are in the U.S. Senate. So if you're sitting at home watching this show, you've got to remember there are 51 Republicans in the U.S. Senate and there are 49 Democrats. Of course, there's a Republican in the White House. So if there ever came a 50-50 vote on an issue, you got to break the tie. And the Constitution says the vice president can come in and break the tie either way. So to control the Senate, you got to have the majority, or at least the ability to break a tie at 50-50, and that means a lot. Who are the committee chairmen? Who's the majority leader, which handles, who decides what bills we're going to bring up, what's the agenda we're going to do. It is enormous. It's gigantic, and obviously Republicans have had that power specifically for the last 2 years, even before then. It's been several terms since they've had that power. So that is what is at stake with the 2 Senate races here in Mississippi. Obviously with the 2 incumbents, Roger Wicker and Cindy Hyde-Smith, being able to control the power of the U.S. Senate and continue to work with President Trump. To me, that is sort of the overarching theme of why these 2 races in Mississippi are so important for more conservative governance in Washington, D.C.
I think Austin got the civics part of this right. I think the other part of it is the political part. And so I think for Republicans, Democrats, Independents who were less than pleased with the election of Donald Trump, who have been less than pleased with the increasing polarization of our politics and our politicians, a tone that seems to be digressing by the day, and who also believe that having a checks and balance is a good thing. I think it's also important because you have an opportunity in the House to have a little bit more balancing within the Congress. And so that's a crucial thing. And of course, this playing field, and we'll talk about this in a moment, I'm sure, does not favor Democrats, you know, in terms of where they're having to play defense and otherwise. But because of Donald Trump and the unpopularity of his time in office, there may be some opportunities to win in places they haven't in a while.
Well, let's talk specifically about the Wicker-Baria race. You said the race doesn't favor, the environment doesn't favor Democrats in that race. You work with David Baria, he's your law partner. Austin, you once ran Senator Wicker's campaign in 2008. Obviously, we know where you stand on the candidates themselves, but do you think David Baria, running for senator in Mississippi as a Democrat, has a chance?
You know, I do, and I'm very excited. Of course, I am friends with David. I served with David in the legislature, and we are law partners now. But much more than that, I think David is the type of candidate as a Mississippi Democrat that we've really wanted for a very long time. And to have him running in a high-profile race, to be taking the issues directly to the incumbent, is very exciting, and it's been a mobilizing factor. I helped work on his campaign there during the primary, and I got to see a new class of voters coming in. We were speaking with some younger folks that perhaps we haven't been able to reach in past campaigns, and seeing women and some white folks maybe take a second look at the Democratic Party. David Baria is a dynamic candidate who can do some of that. And so we're still in Mississippi. The state of play is the state of play. But David has brought some dynamism to this race that we just haven't seen, and I think the ripple effects of that are going to continue.
Before we want to move on to the special Senate race here shortly, but talk a little bit about Wicker and his chances and his voting record.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough to run Roger Wicker's first Senate race in 2008. And I want to say this about David Baria. I like him personally. I think he's a good candidate. I think he is a strong statewide candidate, but he's got a mountain to overcome. But listen, you got to take him seriously. You really do. He's a smart guy. He's got a track record. I totally disagree with him on most of the policy issues that he has. More importantly, Roger Wicker does. But I tell you what, it's made me really proud to see the things that Roger Wicker has done in the 10 years that he's been in the U.S. Senate. He has the ability to work as a very effective, conservative statesman and senator, getting things done like the tax cut, seeing Judge Kavanaugh get appointed. More important things, or equally as important, I don't want to say more important, equally as important things like the SHIPS Act, which allowed us to rebuild our Navy after Barack Obama just sort of let the Navy say that's not as important. It really helps your home county of Jackson County, where they're building some of these ships at Ingalls Shipyard, but also for Roger Wicker to be able to work in a bipartisan way across the aisle with Democrats on issues of how do we get more private investment in research on diseases like Alzheimer's and muscular dystrophy. And that makes me very proud and happy to say that I played a real small role in Roger Wicker getting to the U.S. Senate, and I think doing a really good job of representing us on a multitude of issues, both in a conservative way, but in a bipartisan way as well.
Just a couple things. I think it's important to say that Ray Mabus was the Secretary of the Navy during President Obama's tenure, and I think there would be some strong disagreement on whether or not the Navy took a step back during that tenure. But the thing that I think is important when we talk about contrast between these candidates, you mentioned statesmen, but then you immediately mentioned the highly partisan tax cuts and the highly partisan Kavanaugh. That's not statesmanship. And that's one of the things that is woefully lacking now in Washington is courage, political courage. And for all of his kind of hands across America, apple pie and mom kind of funding for things that we all sort of agree on, Roger has been in lockstep with this president and would have been in lockstep with Mitt Romney and would have been in lockstep with whoever the Republican is. So a highly partisan senator who hasn't shown the backbone to stand up to this president whenever he steps out of line, even whenever other senators have done so. And so he has been a rubber stamp. And I do think in Mississippi, as conservative as we may or may not be, there is some expectation that the people we elect use their mouth, use their platform to make sure that we don't just go along to get along.
If rubber stamp means I'm going to support Judge Kavanaugh, if rubber stamp means I'm going to be for a tax cut, let's find the stamp pad and start stamping.
All right, let's move on to the special election. The early polling indicates that there's a strong chance that Cindy Hyde-Smith, the Republican, and Mike Espy, Democrat, could end up in a runoff. Brandon, why do you think those two specifically have sort of, at least in early polls, have been the favorites?
Well, again, you have the Democrats putting up a very strong candidate, Mike Espy, former congressman, former cabinet member, someone who seems to have his fingers on the pulse of what is important to rural Mississippians and has spoke pretty well to those issues. And so there's a lot of pride in both David Baria and Mike Espy being on the ticket for us. I was expecting Chris McDaniel to challenge Cindy Hyde-Smith really tough. I mean, we saw in 2013 what an effective campaigner Chris can be, and I expected that money would follow and we'd see some type of parity like we saw the last time he ran. And so I've been a little bit surprised as we've gotten closer and closer to Election Day that it does look, as you say, like Cindy Hyde-Smith is going to move into that number 2 spot whenever the votes are counted, and make the runoff. But one thing I will say, and Austin knows this better than perhaps anybody, that is a hard-working, tough group of supporters that McDaniel has. So I think we discount them at our own peril.
You know, there's not a lot of public polling in that race. There just isn't. I've seen some private polling, but I hadn't seen anything in the past few days or week or two. You talk about hard working. I mean, Chris McDaniel is a hard worker. He is. And one thing I know about Chris McDaniel is he has a tremendous base of support that are going to show up and vote for him, whether it's snowing, it's raining, or the sun is out. Those folks are going to go out and are going to vote for him. And you have to take him very seriously. No, he has not been able to probably raise, I'm not going to say probably, he has not been able to raise nearly as much money in 18 as he did in 14, which gave him such a competitive advantage against Thad Cochran. But still, he's much more better known now than he was in 2014, so you don't have to have all of that money. So it'll be really interesting. And look, he's the underdog in this race. He probably likes being the underdog, playing that role.
That's his spot.
But to count him out on Election Day, to count him out of saying he's going to make a primary would be, the runoff would be crazy.
Yeah.
And I won't sit here and do that.
But you said something kind of interesting. You know, if we have tornado watches on that day like we did last night across Mississippi, look out for McDaniel to maybe surprise some folks.
Wouldn't the Mike Espy campaign prefer to be up against Chris McDaniel in a runoff rather than Cindy Hyde-Smith?
I mean, that's not inside baseball there. I mean, Chris is the id of the Mississippi Republican Party. Even in a place as conservative as Mississippi, that type of just rampant reactionary politics, we feel like we can beat that. We feel like we can beat those types of politics even in Mississippi. And that's one of the reasons that in the light of Donald Trump and the way that he has used the bully pulpit throughout his administration, you're seeing Democrats have a shot to win state houses in Georgia and Florida, to win governor's mansions in those places. So these types of reactionary folks that clearly kind of live off of drumming up those supporters into a frenzy, we feel like we can win the debate with them, with folks who are truly not committed but are independent and just want to see what's best for the state. So yes, to answer your question.
I think when we get to a runoff, if Cindy Hyde-Smith gets in a runoff with Espy, she has a really great story to tell. Okay, she is from rural Mississippi. She's a small business owner. She's a mother. She's the first female U.S. senator in the history of Mississippi. I mean, she is a real farmer and rancher. She has a way to connect with rural people in Mississippi as much as any Republican in a long time. And I hope that if she gets in a runoff, she'll spend a lot of time connecting on those issues, because I think those are very powerful and will get her ultimately across the finish line.
And yet she does not want to debate, at least not before the election coming up, nor does the incumbent Senator Roger Wicker. What are we to make of that, where in one case the appointed senator, the other the incumbent, don't want to debate in a public forum?
It's an issue for me, and I'll tell you why. When you go to the United States Senate, you are primarily there to debate. and hold a position, and to be able to represent that position and articulate why you think a certain vote should go a certain way. And so the notion that in the job interview for that job, you would not debate your opponent is very telling. Now, look, I think those of us watching this, even Republicans know, Roger loses in a debate to David. He just does. He doesn't hold his own against David Baria, so his handlers are obviously telling him don't show up for that. I'm not so sure the same isn't true, even though she's been serving in the Senate for quite a while, that Cindy Hyde-Smith doesn't feel that she loses to Mike. But for whatever reason, they've chosen not to speak, and I think that whenever you're talking about a job description that's like the United States Senate and you have incumbents who are hiding from voters, there's something weird about that.
Yeah, I mean, I know Brandon's got to say that Baria would beat Wicker in a debate. I totally disagree.
I think Wicker knows that.
No, listen, I sat there right there in 2008 when Roger Wicker, who was just barely into the U.S. Senate, debated a former governor and Ronnie Musgrove and just tore him up. And it was good, and it was a big pivotal moment in that campaign for Wicker. So I think Wicker would be fine against Baria, but I'm sure Baria's a good debater. In the special election debate, I don't know the details of it. I'm for debating. I wish they'd do more of it.
Well,
I like the debate, Brandon.
We'll see if that might happen before the runoff.
Not our problem.
Thank you both. We're out of time. And don't forget, Tuesday is Election Day. The polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And for the full interviews with the candidates, visit our webpage, mpbonline.org/issue. Follow us on social media for election coverage and download the free MPB mobile app. And join us again next time right here on MPB for another edition of At Issue.